In the beginning there was nothing, no people, no plants, no animals. The world was soft and dark. Ancestral beings emerged. Creators could see all time from the dreaming till now. They began to make people, plants and animals. They made language and law for each country with stories and lessons for all. We are from the oldest living cultures of the world. Across this land we lead the custodianship of people, plants and animals. It is our responsibility to protect these ancient laws, custom and country, to respect our ancestors and creators. With the Indigenous Mapping Workshop, we map our stories, customs and languages. We map our country with the world's best practices. This meets our cultural, spiritual and economical obligation, and it allows us to continue caring for our communities. We always have and always will use technology, and we invite you to join us. We acknowledge our country and welcome you to the Indigenous Mapping Workshop.
Waiba, everyone. My name is Andrew Murrumburry Dowding, and I'm a proud traditional owner from the Pilbara region in WA. I am wanting to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I speak on today. And I acknowledge the Wadjuk community and their elders past and present. So I am the Indigenous Mapping Workshop organiser in Australia, and I've coordinated this workshop with our partners since 2018. The Indigenous Mapping Workshop is part of a network of Indigenous mapping events run across the globe. And we know that worldwide, Indigenous communities are united in their struggles to maintain their cultural heritage and protect their traditional lands. Our focus at the Indigenous Mapping Workshop is the building of skills in the Indigenous community. What we are interested in is building skills for Aboriginal people for jobs that they're into right now. These jobs are already there. We know about we're not talking about creating new jobs or somewhere off into the future. I'm talking about jobs that exist today in every Indigenous community, in every state across Australia. The types of roles that I'm talking about are Indigenous ranger roles, in working within native title organisations, Indigenous cultural organisations, language centres. And we know from creating this workshop that a lot of these organisations are using Indigenous mapping. And so what we're really interested in is upskilling people within those organisations or to move into those organisations. And that's really what Indigenous Mapping Workshop is about. And today we obviously celebrate our launch of the Indigenous Mapping Workshop. It's been a really weird year for us at the Indigenous Mapping Workshop Australia and worldwide. And we're really glad to have been able to pivot our workshop into an online learning platform. And this means that Indigenous Mapping Workshop Australia is more accessible than ever. We're able to put our training materials online, and communities and individuals from all over remote and rural Australia, from every state, is able to access our online platform and interact with our workshop materials. So let's jump straight into the event, and I can't wait to tell you about all the stuff that we've been doing and for you guys to get on the platform. And we've got some speakers as well that we want to introduce now. So It's my pleasure to introduce now Professor Marcia Langton and her colleagues Darren Clinch and James Rose from the Indigenous Data Network to speak to us about Indigenous mapping in Australia.
And I would like to first of all acknowledge the traditional owners of the country where I'm speaking from, in Naarm or Melbourne. So I acknowledge the Wurundjeri traditional owners of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge their emerging leaders, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the countries represented at the Indigenous Mapping Workshop. It's a big honour, Andrew, for me to be invited to the Indigenous Mapping Workshop. It's become quite a famous event and very difficult to get into. So I made it through the door. Thank you. As I was explaining to you the other day, I was first introduced to digital mapping systems back in the 1980s in the Northern Territory, when I was a much younger anthropologist working on land claims and recording sites and, boundaries and such for land claims. And the whole geographic information system, or digital mapping exercise, was in its very early days back then. But it was very clear that the introduction of this marvelous technology that enabled us to link to a satellite or satellites in the sky, and you yourself might remember having to wait for some more satellites to pass overhead to get a reading. But now the world has changed so much. I'm reminded of the fact that when I was a youngster, I lived in some circumstances for some years where we had no electricity. My grandmother had never turned on a light switch. I can remember long before the days of photocopying and then eventually email. So for future generations, and to ensure that it's readily accessible to them, and to share in our own groups. So one of the issues in this big challenge for me, and one that excites me, is the need to train young people in the disciplines that are required, such as computer engineering, computer science, epidemiology, geography, and anthropology, and many other related disciplines. Archiving, and I think the whole world of digital archiving changes every day. So I hope that our projects here at the University of Melbourne in the Indigenous Data Network will very soon prove to be of great value to your team, to other Indigenous groups around the country who are keen, like we are, to ensure that cultural heritage is preserved, maintained, and most of all, documented and archived for future generations. This is a big change in the way that we practice and keep our cultures, but I think it's a very necessary one. If we don't have these skills and the technology and keep up with the rest of the world, we will be left behind. We cannot afford to be left behind once again, and we cannot afford yet again to have this kind of information, this very precious cultural information, colonised and kept in institutions that pay no attention to our cultural and social needs. So the whole issue of Indigenous governance and management of this problem is absolutely critical, and it's only with excellent training and qualifications that Indigenous people will be able to own, govern and manage geographical information on digital data systems. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I and my team. I look forward to hearing the presentations in the Indigenous Mapping Workshop.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you very much. I think we lost you there for a moment, but we definitely captured what you said about the importance of skills and Indigenous mapping. I now want to pass over to Darren Clinch, who's an affiliate researcher at the Indigenous Data Network. Thanks again for your time and insight, Marcia. Darren, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Marcia. Always such a fascinating listening every time you talk. And I feel very privileged to be over at the Indigenous Data Network myself as the Data Analytics Coordinator. I'm a buddy my man from Yamaji country, so been living and working in Melbourne for almost 12 years now. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I kind of got into GIS myself. What I use GIS for, what I've used it for in the past and in my work experiences and tasks that I've been given over the years. So I did a Master's in Public Health through Deakin University down here in Victoria. And of particular interest to me was one of the first things they wanted us to learn about was public health policy and how it evolved during the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and particularly in Britain. And there was a very interesting story about a guy called John Snow. And I know a lot of people have heard me talk about this guy, and I'm not talking about the Jon Snow from, is he dead, is he alive from Game of Thrones. I'm talking about the physician or the GP, John Snow. He became very, very well known in the epidemiology world because of the way that he used information to identify a water well that was being reinfected with cholera. So back in those days, there wasn't flowing water, they were all well pumps. And he basically walked the streets of the Soho district of London, marking out the deaths of where everybody was. And he basically used a non-mathematical, non-GIS based triangulation method to work out which well was making people sick and dying from cholera. And all he did was he lobbied the council and said, take that water pump off, and they basically stopped that outbreak of cholera. So the use of spatial thinking, spatial mapping has been around for a really, really long time. I'm absolutely fascinated by some of the things such as where the term Mercator comes from, why North is always, Europe is in the Northern Hemisphere, why isn't Australia in the Northern, If you turn the map upside down, the typical Mercator map, everyone goes, the map's upside down. But if you asked an alien flying past Earth, would they know it's upside down? No, they don't. So it became, that very European-centric way of displaying maps. So one of the things that really piqued my interest was my last year of high school. I got sent to do work experience at Department of Planning and Environment. And all I did for 2 weeks was use a crosshair plotter, and I plotted aerial photographs, learnt how they create the actual digital file in a computer, and this was all DOS-based, so no Windows GUI, which we're blessed with these days. And then I learnt to plot those maps that I'd created, the electronic version, on the big plotter with the colours in the middle. So I was always being fascinated with GIS. I worked in the building trade for 8 years, so all I did was look at housing plans and use rulers and pens and maths. And then when I started working in the Department of Health and Human Services just on 10 years ago, I mainly work with Aboriginal data, and I work with a couple of data sets called the VAD and the VMD. So that's the Victorian Admitted Episodes data and the emergency management. And quite often people would want to know, do Aboriginal people selectively choose which hospital they go and get services from? So I thought GIS was the perfect way of doing this, because you could plot out where the people are travelling from, and you can also plot out the hospital they're going to, and which other similar services they're bypassing. And that, to me, sometimes indicates a lack of cultural safety at hospitals. They might not have had an AHLO, an Aboriginal birthing unit, those kinds of things. And sometimes GIS can actually show you so clearly what's going on when people vote with their feet. So I ended up in a part of the Department of Health and Human Services called System Intelligence and Analytics. And while there, I was working in business intelligence and geospatial support. So I take mapping and I wrap it up with data visualization using software such as ClickSense, Power BI, those kinds of software. And I'm even started to learn, about 3 years ago, I started to learn to use R, because inside R, you can use packages such as Leaflet and ggmap. And if you want to go really crazy, you can even add ray shader to it and create 3-dimensional maps that are quantifiably dictated in height by whatever value you decide. You need a pretty powerful computer to do that though, so I wouldn't try doing that on your basic laptop. I found out the hard way. So while at the department, the last couple of big jobs I worked on, and this is probably one to mention, is in Victoria we have a thing called a medically supervised injecting room. It's hosted by the North Richmond Health and Community Centre. So I did the mapping for that, but not only that, I also got to interview the clients that had immediately used the room, because they knew that they were going to be Aboriginal clients using the injecting room. So I was part of the evaluation team, but I also had those extra skills I've added to my toolbox over the years. So then I'm able to perform multiple roles, and it makes me a more valuable employee, I think, as well. And so I got to the point where I knew how to do interviews with clients. I'd had plenty of practice doing that when I worked in the prison system, when I worked in youth justice as well. But to also be able to take that data and information and then visually impact upon people's thinking using maps and using charts and graphs is amazingly powerful. And I think my heritage as a buddy by a man and my family's heritage of storytelling, it's almost a match made in heaven. That storytelling, the ability to weave a story and then back it up with robust empirical evidence, and then the visual aspect of it. So quite often I get asked, how did I get into this? And it was never really planned. I just picked a lot of skills up along the way. And then now I find myself amazingly working for the Indigenous Data Network and working with people like Marcia and James. So the last thing I'm going to add to this is I tend to look for resources that I can tap into. So things like LOCI, which is the location index. So you've got people involved from Geoscience Australia, CSIRO, then you've got the ABS who are also looking at doing spatial data networks. Then you've got AURIN, which is the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, which is a huge resource of data, and particularly spatial data, that I'm sure all you guys could possibly tap into and definitely get some benefit and use out of. So hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit more of that knowledge with you as we travel a little further. And just the last thing I'd love to say is I was so looking forward to this workshop because it was going to be in Melbourne. I was really, really excited. So I hope you all attend next year, and I can definitely be there in person next time. So thanks very much, and I'll pass over to James Rose.
Thanks, Darren, and thank you also to Marcia and to Andrew for organising. It's an honour to be invited to participate in delivering this keynote. I'm a strategic coordinator with the Indigenous Data Network, so I work alongside Darren and Marcia and a number of other highly proficient technical experts at the Indigenous Studies Unit in the Melbourne School of Population Health. And I was going to offer a kind of an overview of how I arrived at this situation as a white man in Australia working in this space. So I was raised partly on the APY lands in the Western Desert. My parents were involved in health and the land rights movement back in the early 80s. And I grew up in a little homeland there called Anaja, which is on the Man Ranges on the Gun Barrel Highway between Armada and Pibilajara, which is right on the WA-SA border, right up towards Uluru. And so my first exposure to maps was these 250K topos that were used by the old people as part of the homelands movement to get infrastructure set up at each of the little spots that they'd been living away from for a very long time after the missile tests in the 40s and 50s. And I remember very clearly from a young age these 250k topo maps being spread out on the ground with everybody poring over them and talking about where each of the families' country was, where all the dreamings were they all interlinked with each other. And you know, I grew up speaking Pitjantjatjara, and so it was a mix of English and Pitjantjatjara that was being used. And there was a mix of these very technical, detailed maps with this very traditional way of talking about the country and about families that left a big impression on me. Later on in Adelaide, when I finished high school, I went to do a degree in fine art, and I really wanted to paint landscapes because I really loved landscapes, you know. And then, you know, I did that for a little while, but then it wasn't technically challenging enough because I love formal descriptions. I love formal mathematics, formal ways of understanding the world as another way of appreciating the beauty of the land, you know, and the beauty of the way people interact with each other in a systematic way. And so I switched over to anthropology, like Marcia. And eventually I wound up as a sacred sites officer, working out of Alice Springs in Central Australia, protecting sacred sites from threats like mining or highway realignments and things like that. And what that allowed me to do was to sort of merge together all of those childhood experiences together with my love of technical ways of describing things and learn about GIS systems. So the very old Magellan-based GPSs that people used to use, together with those 250k topo maps. And back in those days, the systems were so unreliable that our boss, our manager, used to tell us to write down the coordinates once we got them off the GPS, because we were never sure if it was going to stop working before we got back to the office in Alice Springs. And then I had a child and moved down to Sydney and got involved in native title. And that's where things really took off. Because in native title, the federal court's asking you to prove how people are connected to country. And so you're being tested. It's different to Central Australia, where you can just go and ask the old people and they'll tell you exactly where all the sacred sites are and exactly which families belong to which country. In a court setting where you're in front of a judge, you've actually got to argue the case. You know, as a white man, you know, that's a complicated thing to be asked to do. So I started looking at what I could offer to that process that was different. What secret weapon could I contribute to the process? And so I started working on this idea that you could show the kinship networks that link all the families together and to country, at the same time show all the dreaming networks that link the families to the sites on country, and you could build it all into one single model that you could show the lawyers and the judge in a way that they would understand without any training or without any experience of culture. So, you know, I came up with an idea for a PhD, and Marcia very generously agreed to supervise that PhD. And I developed this technique called spatiotemporal kinship modeling, which works in Google Earth most effectively. And I don't know if there's a way here that I can display a little example. Andrew, is that possible? I just choose a screen. So this is a little example of some kinship networks from Southeast Australia here. And it's a bit hard to tell what it is. You know, we're in Google Earth. A lot of people in the audience would know Google Earth. But we can zoom in with my very bad mouse skills. And we can see that these are lines joining together dots. And each dot has a number. Now each one of these dots is a person. And each line links that person to their children and to their parents. And the location of each dot is the place where that person was born. And the number is a way of keeping that person's identity hidden and secret, so we don't know that person's name. This is the way we do it in the native title court cases. And the color of the lines is the language that gets passed down from parent to child. Now, what is different about this graph is that it's three-dimensional. So we can rotate down to the side And we can see those lines of descent going from each parent to their child, top to bottom, which means that we've got the oldest ancestors at the top, and we've got the youngest children at the bottom. And that covers about 230 to 250 years of Australian history, where we can get enough data, as Marcia and Darren were talking about, to be able to show where everybody was born. And what this helps do in a native title setting is show not just that particular people are connected to a particular country in a very particular way that has to do with your family, how tightly connected your family is to each other and to country. But you can use it to show much bigger patterns, like what language belongs to what country. And I haven't got it here in this graph, but we can also use it to show how the dreamings belong together to particular areas of country. And I've done similar work there in Central Australia, in this area here, which is where I grew up, in the Man Ranges, this little spot over here. This is the little homeland imagery. I'm just going to quickly zoom in and show you. Here we go. Here's the valley here. Can't even find the houses because they're too little. But you can do that kind of network modeling for the whole country. And I think that would be a really exciting thing to look into and for everyone to think about. So thanks for letting me talk, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, James, for your presentation, and thanks to Marcia and Darren as well. But now we're going to speak to our IMW steering committee, and I'd like to welcome them all to the call. Firstly, hi to you, Mocha. Mocha runs the Indigenous Mapping Wanaga in New Zealand, and he's the Managing Director of Digital Navigators. So, hey Mocha.
Kia ora, Andrew. Kia ora koutou. Hi, everyone.
And the next member of our steering committee who's joining us today is Riley Seamster. Riley is a Senior Program Manager from Google Earth Outreach in California, and she's been heavily involved with Indigenous Mapping Workshop Global Network. So hi Riley.
Hi everyone from Oakland, California.
Look, thanks for joining us today, everyone. And firstly, I'd like to speak to our steering committee about why the move to our Indigenous, why the move to our digital platform has been so important. We've had a crazy year this year, and we're really sad that we're not able to be all together to do IMW. And so I'd like to get some thoughts from you guys about like the move, the change, in taking workshops online. And I know, Riley, you've had some experience leading up to your Geo for Good in this space. So give us a bit of a sense of why that's become so important nowadays. Yeah,
well, I think that even though in many places right now we can't be together in person, the work doesn't stop. The work that people are doing in their communities to help support each other during this time. And so, I mean, we have seen a lot of people using all sorts of different mapping tools in the past 6 or so months to do things like identify like where in the community you could go to pick up school lunches, or how to find testing centers and more. So I think it's important that they're able to learn how to use these tools to create maps and other resources for their communities. And so, yeah, we still need to be doing these trainings, even if we can't come together in person. And so I think what IMW On Demand is doing is fantastic to kind of support communities through this to keep mapping.
Yeah, what about you, Mocha? Have you seen, more people moving events and their work sort of online in this kind of crazy moment that we're in?
It's been phenomenal, to be honest. Andrew, it's been crazy. 2 years ago, I had Zoom and I wasn't using it. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and now we're Zooming until 11 o'clock at night, and with Zoom fatigue and having to upskill. So the whole change in appreciation from what we'd say kānui ki te kānui, or face-to-face, to the virtual environment. But what that's also really shown is the need to have wraparound support. So having the digital inclusion and having devices and connectivity, So that's really made it abundantly aware for a lot of communities the lack of. And so I think for me, the positive has actually been the identification that we've been saying it for a long time that our communities haven't been able to engage. And now the government's actually realising that what we've been saying for such a long time. So now they're putting support around it. And so if anything, that's really what I'm kind of seeing as, and a lot of our communities now, we're doing a lot of training around checkpoints, being able to use mapping tools for checkpoints, being able to do, like Rayleigh's saying, in terms of COVID-19 testing, being able to do kai or food drop-offs, health checks. We've been doing online surveys, so our communities have been able to call up the help desk for our tribal organisations, say some of the issues and concerns, and then our tribal organisations have been able to go out and support it. And what we've been able to do with some of these digital technologies around mapping support has been going, delivery, type in, yes, we've delivered it, yes, we've done this is how we've done it, and then being able to go back and then keep helping the tribes those ways. So I think definitely within the last 5 months since New Zealand, March, we went down. It's just gone from here to like exponentially, but it's really shown that we need to increase the capacity of our communities to engage with those tools.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to not continue to talk about 2020. It's been such an amazing, crazy year. But I mean, I wanted to kind of cast our minds back to, the first kind of IMWs that you guys came to in Australia in 2018, 2019, wasn't it? And, back in Sydney. And, I was just thinking about, asking you some questions about that kind of work, with the IMW here and in your communities as well. And what have you kind of seen as like the kind of most important impacts out of those kind of workshops themselves? I mean, I know there's impacts now from, dealing with COVID and all that, but what have you seen like developing over the last few years in terms of rolling out those workshops in communities? Maybe I'll ask Mocha actually first. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah.
It's right. I think from more or less the educational component, that's probably what we're seeing more. So the ability to do storytelling, and so the more as a tool where traditional elders and communities have been able to sit with those who have the ability to record that information, as Steve would say, direct to digital, and then be able to capture that. And then how do you use that information to be able to convey a story with communities? I think that's increasing. And as the technology is growing, you're seeing more the ease of the mapping platforms such as Google Earth. And so you've been able to plot and be able to capture that. That's, we're talking that around that in Sydney. And then for our communities, that's just been saying, okay, what added stuff we can talk about now, the water, how can we talk about traditional harvesting and gathering, and then being able to communicate that to a wider, so a lot of our communities that don't live there, but live elsewhere, say in Australia and so forth, how can we convey those rich stories and be able to visualize fly-throughs? And that's what I'm seeing a lot more of.
Yeah, thanks, Smokey. Yeah, you're right. That internal storytelling is a really good thing too, isn't it? That story, like being able to capture your own story, but then like externalize it to communities outside of your own as well. I think it's been a great thing. What about you, Raleigh? Like, what's the most sort of important impacts that you've seen from IMWs around the world?
I mean, I definitely think that there's been a lot of amazing projects that people have been able to go on to do after getting that training at the IMWs. But I think one thing that really inspires me is seeing people who kind of came the first year and they were new to everything and they were starting to learn it and take it all in. The next year, they might come back and like take some more advanced classes. And then suddenly the next year they're teaching the classes. So that's really cool to see people kind of like, starting out new and then being able to start to teach and train others and lead others. I love seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of leading into the next question I wanted to ask about how you see IMW expanding people's digital literacy and, even like in this, international context that we've got, the kind of cultural exchange between different, IMWs. and you know, like that developing kind of sense of spatial awareness in communities. Have you seen IMW holding a really central role for that, Mocha? How do you see that?
I think since like Rayleigh came 2014, Rayleigh, when we ran one in Awanuiarangi and Whakatane, and from that point, you know, at the beginning we had Sean and the team come over. Majority of our team were like 100 plus. We were pretty much really new to Google Earth, and then over the years, as you say, being digitally literate, you know, they're at this point, and then you know, then now they've developed digitally fluency. So now they're fluent through Google Earth, and now they're extending themselves into QGIS and ArcGIS. So that extension and that awareness around concepts and ideas has really grown. So data sovereignty and so not only talking about how do you capture a point or a story, how do you maintain it, how do you visualize it, and then how do you own it? You know, all those things have just grown and over the times, and having the workshops that we have to internationally learn and grow, I think, Andrew, with yourselves and Steve and the Firelight in Canada, with the help of Google Earth and Rayleigh's team, has really extended the knowledge base and also how we look at succession in terms of those within our tribes and our communities. They're now being able to go to Geo for Good. And then being able to partner with other Indigenous communities. You know, we're looking at different ways that we're developing issues or concerns that we have here. You know, you're doing exactly the same things that I'm seeing with Gunyama, and you're talking about digital literacy or the lack of digital inclusion. That's all those things are happening here. So, you know, the patterns, being able to share those and being able to learn from each other has been just an awesome. And I think I'll really take my hat off to you around this idea, which is why I'm really supportive of it, because I think that's really where we need to be looking at also here in Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mocha. Yeah, and what about you, Raleela? You've seen IMWs from the start almost, and seen how they've expanded, you know, people's horizons. Like, is there some reflections you have on that?
I do. I feel like Mocha expressed it so well, though it's hard to add much more than that. I think you really kind of captured the growth of the program worldwide. But like, just to echo, I think that in the early years, it was more about how do you drop the points and how do you do things. And now I think it's kind of ignited those conversations about data sovereignty and stewardship. And so I think that's like an amazing thing that's come out of it, is now you have this network of practitioners that can really share the best practices and talk about these higher level issues about how to manage and protect that incredibly valuable, rich data that's being collected. So I think that's an amazing outcome that's come out of the growth of the program.
Yeah, he's hard to follow, Mocha, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I think that's true. We're in this kind of almost like in this middle stretch. Like, we've had this initial kind of igniting, and now we're in this kind of plateau. And that's really leads on to the last kind of point I wanted to ask about, which I'm really interested to know. It's like, I think it's about like, what's the vision further for IMW, you know, into the future, and not just IMW, you know, as a workshop, but, you know, Indigenous mapping as a kind of movement. You know, what do you guys see, you know, over the next 10, 15 years? Mocha, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no pressure. I think what I really enjoy around the Indigenous mapping, one, all I can say from us is that, you know, it's a continuation, and that what we're looking at is like, some people define mapping as like 2D maps, and we've talked about this a lot, but actually it's an extension. It's a thought process. It's a way of, you know, we visualize the world in Indigenous communities, and a map is like digital technology integrated with what we call mātauranga Māori or Indigenous knowledge thought patterns. They just naturally stream together. And so what we're doing is we're using the tools that we've got at this moment, and we're enabling our communities to be able to engage with the tools and then be able to use them and apply them in practical settings around home and around our communities. And I think moving forward, that's where the extension should be. So what we're doing, enabling our communities to share our stories, to engage with our communities, and to look at, you know, things where we're looking at the VR and AR and mixed realities where, You know, we already think like that. We already have songs and stories which are so rich in context, and having the ability of taking these tools and what IMW does really well, it has the leaders in these areas such as Google and others, and we're able to partner with them and then elevate and have this unique relationship with them to be able to say, well, let's go on this together. And I think for me, for the next 10 to 25 to 50 years, is bringing our community up so we're able to be quite digitally strong, enabled, and being able to. For me, it's about putting food on the table, roof over your head, and having employment, and everything else wraps around it. And that's what's so beautiful around IMW. IMW doesn't stand alone. It doesn't just kind of exist. It's something that enables our communities to empower our communities to move forward. And that's the beauty of it. And so when you have communities coming together, they're actually talking about common struggles and common issues. And what we all have is a common vision around how do we make our communities better, and what we're using is digital technology to enable that. And at the moment, we're using the Google tools, we're using other tools, and they might be extending those tools, and then we're looking at more tools as we get to this point. But it's also about having those relationships with organisations who can empower or can enable our communities to actually appreciate what we're looking at and how we're looking in the future. So for me, IMW is just a continual pathway. And I think what's beautiful is we've got this international relationship with yourselves, Andrew in Australia, with Steve in Canada, and Rayleigh in the United States, with Cynthia and all these other organisations that all have, if I would say it in a whakawhanaungatanga, a relationship or a bond and a commonality about what we're struggling and how we're trying to communicate. And IMW has, for me, really opened up that relationship and has been able to enable a partnership, or I would say a brotherhood, a sisterhood, that we've been able to have this, really, really unique bond. And moving forward, I'd love to see Aotearoa and our communities sharing and going to Australia and going to Canada, and the same here, having that sharing and that bond to be able to communicate. But then it's all about being able to apply it, because it's not theoretical. Everything's applied. And that's what's beautiful about this. You can take these tools and we can enable it, and that's how we can partner and share. Sorry, I talk a lot, but that's quite passionate about it. But yeah, I think that's me.
Yeah, that is, I wanted to capture that passion, definitely, because I know how passionate you are about your mapping in communities and even Indigenous communities globally. So thanks, Moko. Yeah. What about you, Raleigh? How do you see a sort of the next sort of 10 years, in a way, like rolling out for Indigenous communities in mapping? You've been involved for a while, so you've seen probably some sort of macro trends, but it'd be interesting to hear, like what you think, the future looks like.
Yeah, I think that Indigenous communities more and more are using these mapping tools and, building their capacity to use tools to map and monitor their lands. The amount of just Earth observation data, satellite imagery, drone imagery, like there's so much data out there now that's really showing how our land and water is changing over time and what's happening. So I think there's incredible potential for Indigenous communities to be able to use all those tools and data in order to be able to make better decisions about their land. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, and I think that the IMW provides a community where they can come and learn those technologies, learn those platforms, decide which one is right for them, and be able to kind of, like Moko said, bring it all back home. Because really, it's not about the tools; it's about what you do with them and how it's impacting your communities. So, I'm really excited to see that continue to grow over the next 10 years.
Look, I think we'll leave it there. But thanks so much, guys, for joining us today. And it's so awesome, really, to have an international network of partners who are working with Indigenous communities. And I think, IMW Australia really benefits from your input and your knowledge and your experiences. And I know that I take like sort of personal inspiration from the work that you guys do as well. So it kind of drives me to continue the workshops and maintain the good standard of the Indigenous mapping workshops as well. So So yeah, thanks for your time today, and yeah, we'll say thanks to you, and we'll see you at the next IMW in Australia when we can have them.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Ka kite.
Bye-bye.
So guys, now we're going to talk with Terry Garwood, and he's going to give us an address and open the IMW Australia On Demand platform for us. So can we just welcome Terry, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Terry Garwood, a proud member of the Yorta Yorta, Wamba Wamba and Wagea peoples. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from wherever you're joining us, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As I like to say, from wherever you are joining us in Australia, you're on Aboriginal land. But I've got a little bit of a sort of a reflection here, which is with that acknowledgement, I also want to remember what I call the long silence, when our traditional ownership of country was not acknowledged. And this effectively went on for over 200 years. And it was indeed a long silence. So it really is my pleasure to officially launch this year's Indigenous Mapping Workshop Australia On Demand. This year has had many challenges, and that's certainly an understatement. But there have been some incredible things, I reckon, that have taken place. The ingenuity that I've seen communities display, the ability of people, teams, communities and organisations to adapt with grace, I reckon. It's certainly in that way been, I think, some of the beacons of light this year. And one of those things, I think, is the exceptional work that the Australian Indigenous Mapping team, led by Winyama, has delivered to get us to where we are today to launch this event. You know, just last year, our department, that's Victoria's Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, was involved in the face-to-face workshop that was held in Perth. We invested in it, we sent some of our staff, and we also sponsored members of Victoria's traditional owner communities to attend, and it was a great success. It was really a great success, and which is why we wanted to invest in it again. And not only that, we wanted to host it here in Victoria. Well, obviously 2020 had other plans with the pandemic. So our friends at the Winyama team have expertly pivoted, and now the event is 100% online, and I reckon it's actually a big opportunity. They made 2020 work for them, and I'm really proud to be part of the process, a small part, but part of the process. They harnessed this year's dramatic acceleration of digital transformation that people across the globe are tackling to enable traditional owners and Aboriginal communities across Australia to be able to access this important training in 2020. And now, from their own homes, wherever it suits them, I think actually it's an amazing opportunity. So this year, from I think the last count, but it's rising daily, there's over 180 registrations. That means that the team have almost doubled the registrations from last year. Better yet, this year's content will have enabled a lasting legacy, as it will be available online on the fantastic new learning platform that the team have created. So why are we doing this, you might ask? Well, the goal of IMW Australia On Demand is to build the capacity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to tell stories of connection with land and water. We are the world's first storytellers, and we're fantastic storytellers. And through this training, we'll have even more tools in that storytelling that'll be within our gift. We're going to be using cutting-edge technology and world-leading digital skills. We can add spatial data and digital mapping to our toolbox, and it will have a... My department's investment is part of our commitment to enabling Aboriginal talent building, leadership, and decision making, as well as data sovereignty, as communities progress towards greater self-determination. And Victoria, if I have a bit of a skite at the moment, is moving towards treaty as the first jurisdiction in Australia to do so. This work is a key priority for us, and it's reflected in our Aboriginal Self-Determination Reform Strategy 2020-2025, Pupunyali Maman Yipu, in English, Owning Our Future, which we launched just last month. The strategy is based on the right of Aboriginal Victorians to make choices that best reflect them on their journey to self-determination. It's our responsibility to partner with traditional owners and Aboriginal Victorians to advance self-determination, and we're committed to delivering real outcomes by following their lead, and this is the crunch, holding ourselves accountable to owners for this to occur. This is our policy in action. Our department said we would, and this is just one of the ways we're keeping our promises. And we do have, I'm really pleased to say, a track record. In fact, last year was the, as many of you would know, was the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages, and it was a great opportunity for us to promote and help preserve Aboriginal place names and languages. We did this through co-designing award-winning Aboriginal place names workshops across Victoria. We created 2 documentaries, one for Wuarakarong, meaning place of plenty in the Wathaurong language, and the other about Budjbim, meaning high head in the Gunditj Mirring language. And there's more documentaries planned in the future. We partnered with organisations to deliver exhibitions such as Melbourne Museum's A River of Language, which promoted Victoria's Aboriginal languages and was seen by many thousands of visitors to the museum. Back in our central office, our staff get to know the languages of the lands on which they live and work as we partnered with traditional owners to use Aboriginal languages to name over 120 of our meeting rooms. So staff across our offices can use Aboriginal languages in their everyday interactions. It was really a rewarding and amazing year. DILP, our colleagues in my department, DILP, are now considering how we can continue language support, with the United Nations declaring 2022 to 2032 to be the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, and we are really looking forward to pushing Indigenous languages over that period. In addition, last year we celebrated the Budjbim cultural landscape in southwestern Victoria being the first place in Australia to receive United Nations World Heritage status solely for its Aboriginal cultural values. Located in the heart of Gunditj Mara country, Budjbim contains one of the world's most extensive and oldest aquaculture systems. Our colleagues have partnered with the Gunditj Mara traditional owners, the Fighting Gunditj Mara people, to provide high-resolution aerial imagery and LiDAR data for the Budjbim cultural landscape. The data is rich with significance. It's amazing, and it's theirs. Indigenous data sovereignty is a key element of our strategy, so the data quite rightfully went back to its traditional owners. It's a prime example of where traditional owners can use digital tools to take ownership of their own geospatial data and map their own culturally significant sites on country. It's amazing work. So I encourage Aboriginal communities and traditional owners, not just in Victoria, but across Australia, to take part in this program. As you know, it's free. It's going to have culturally appropriate content for participants of all mapping abilities on a variety of different platforms and mapping software. Again, it really is amazing. It's being created by traditional owners for traditional owners. And it's my hope that as many individuals and groups from Victoria and indeed across Australia take this opportunity. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. But before I go, I want to congratulate Winyama on developing IMW Australia On Demand, which is an important marker, I believe, in the roadmap to self-determination and digital capacity building for traditional owners. Thanks for listening. I hope you get a lot out of the workshop. Stay safe, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much for your time today, Terry. And now I'm really excited to share with you a quick preview of the IMW Australia On Demand. And I want to show you what it looks like. And to do that, I'm going to introduce Tim Cable, who's running our service desk. So if you guys have any problems with the platform or getting online, getting onto our training materials online, Tim will be the guy at the other end of the phone or on the chat bar that's integrated into the site, and he's now going to take us through just a quick preview of the site and how you enroll in courses. So take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll just quickly get my screen up for you all. One moment. Cool, so you should be able to see here, this is the login page for our system. So I'll quickly get myself signed in here. Cool, so immediately upon logging in, you won't be enrolled in any courses yet. So we'll get into that soon. So after you log in for the first time, you'll get a quick message from our support team. So this is our little live chat here. So if anyone gets stuck or needs help at any time, you can jump on here and message our support team, and they'll get with you and provide support in real time. So quickly closing that now. So if you jumped in, you're a new learner, need to get started, you need to find some courses. So over here on the right, you'll find a button that says Find Courses. So we'll just quickly click that one here. And this will bring up the course catalog. So we've got a wide range of courses here available at IMW Australia On Demand. So just pick one that looks nice. So for example, let's say Deadly Data. And this will quickly bring up some information about the course. So you can read a description, you can read a bit more about it, what you'll learn, course syllabus, etc. Now, if you want to get started, click Enroll. And then View Course. And then that's it, we're in. So from here, you can jump into any part of the course that you'd like. But normally you'd want to start at the beginning. So we'll click Start Course. And this will basically take you through an orientation, and all you have to do is just click Next and navigate your way through the course. So some quick other things as well. If you want to learn more about IMW Australia On Demand, we've got an About page up here, which you can access from the top. That's got some more information about us and our partners and sponsors. And again, if you need help at any time and you forget about the chat widget, or you want to check out our frequently asked questions as well, we've got a help page up here, and you can have a quick scroll down and have a look. And then once you're done, click this little menu option up the top and sign out. And that's back over to you, Andrew.
We're now going to wind up the event. I just want to have the last closing statement. I wanted to say to each of our participants that if you have a passion and interest for working on your country, I think doing our workshops and picking up digital skills really gives you a really broad range of options to remain in your communities and be valuable parts of your workplaces. If you're asking yourself, well, how can I make a difference in my community? I'd say to you, train and skill yourself for the digital future that's here and that's coming as well. And our courses allow for this. Indigenous Mapping Workshop is an opportunity for you to skill yourself in the new economies. I think the last thing I want to say is country is really important. It's important to me and it's important to all our Indigenous participants, but we need to upskill to look after it in the modern context. And this is what Indigenous Mapping Workshop is really at. is really at the heart of Indigenous Mapping Workshop. I want to just close by thanking a couple of our sponsors and our partners as well. And just to say that thank you so much to the people and the organisations who've helped us on this new journey of pivoting a workshop to an online platform. Thanks as well to my team at Winyama and NGIS, who've been amazing over this last few months, where we've really had to struggle to work out how to create a new online experience, and our team has been amazing doing that. So thank you all very much. I now want to just close the proceedings and open up the Indigenous Mapping Workshop on demand to all of our participants. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the website.